Hello again, everyone, and to all y'all there in the Bluegrass State. Welcome to another edition of Pandemic TV. A few nights ago, my wife and I were playing a pandemic card game in our pandemic duplex that we share with my parents. It was guys against gals, and Dad and I were beating the girls so bad at Rook, Kentucky rules, of course, that he started recollecting about the old days when pandemics were respected and they were no respecter of persons. Eventually, I figured to turn the cameras on in my iPhone and on my laptop so we could record this little bit of history at a time when there is at least some similarity to the good old days. I'm talking about the polio pandemic, of course, and our featured guest on today's program was both a victim of polio and one of the heroes of Clark County, Kentucky, when he was dispatched to fetch the very first batch of the Salk vaccine in 1955, along with his armed guard, of course. We're talking about my daddy, John C. Samples of Millers Creek, Kentucky. That's over in Estill County, just about a hog's holler from Irvin and Ravenna, and you can Google that. Our story begins in the summer of 1949. John C. was 16 years old and about to get very sick.
When it became apparent that we were having an epidemic of polio, infantile paralysis, the authorities shut everything down, theaters and any public gathering. And really wasn't much point in shutting it down because people were so frightened they were staying shut in. But I began to feel bad, and of course everybody was alert to what was going on, what the symptoms were. And so Dad hustled me on down to see Dr. Barabbas. And he examined me, asked some questions, and he said, "I don't know, Floyd," but he said, "I think this boy could have polio." Well, it wasn't long till we were in an ambulance headed to Baptist Hospital in Lexington, Kentucky, which was the nearest hospital able to handle isolation and treatment. My dad was kind of a big, rugged guy, and I never saw him cry until that day. And there were tears flowing down his cheek as we traveled. And it was kind of quiet in the ambulance, not much being said.
Had you known anyone to die from this at that point?
Yeah, the little, not little, but the classmate from high school, the Berriman girl, had been stricken with polio and placed, I believe she'd been placed in an iron lung or was about to be or whatever, but anyhow, she passed away. And that had all of us grieving, yeah. And already the hospital was full. So I was on a gurney in the hallway for the first day and night. And it was there, the means of determining the validity of whether or not this was polio or infantile paralysis. They'd take a spinal tap and they could find some kind of bodies in the spinal fluid that said, yes, that's what this is. And so that was a painful process. I remember the doctor was from South America who was taking my spinal tap. He came down the hallway. There was no in the hallway. He came down the hallway and said, "I'm here to tap your spine." And I said, "Okay," not knowing what it meant. But it meant inserting a needle through the lower back and directly into the spine to drain some of the fluid out so it could be examined. After about 3 attempts, which are very painful, but this time my sweat was popping out in big drops of blood because the pain was pretty extreme. If you can imagine having a needle stuck in your spine. And so he finally said, I have too small a needle. Because even though I was only 16, I was kind of heavy at the time, and so the proper age needle wasn't sufficient to reach into my inner spine to get some of the spinal fluid. So he left and got a larger needle and came back. And larger needle meant larger pain. you know, it was pretty mild considering what some of the other people on the gurneys down the hallway were suffering. And
Was your dad still with you?
No, he was not permitted to be in that part of the hospital. So they eventually found a room for me, but it was a shared room, shall we say. It was a private room originally, but there were 4 of us in there, and the beds were foot to foot, 2 on each side of the room, and it was a close fellowship, I might say. But I was there less than 2 weeks, and I remember one of the guy who was at my feet. I think it was about the 3rd night he expired. He died. And of course, you have to understand, in 1949, there were no medications that was prescribed for cure, because there was no cure. There was only treatment. There were some medications that were being experimented with, but none that were successful per se. And they began, the only treatment they had at that time, the favored treatment, and the only one that was effective, was the Sister Kinney treatment process. And that's where they brought in something that kind of looked like the old-fashioned washing machine that's set up on legs, a round tub, but it was a heating device, and they put the flannel cloths in that. This heat had the benefit of stimulating the muscles, which were being attacked by the poliomyelitis virus, and just you retained some of the muscle tissue that was being attacked. And we endured that twice a day when they had enough personnel there to do it, because it was hospital was jammed and people were coming in, people were dying. I think you asked if my parents could come and see me. No, they couldn't. But our minister, Harold Deach, drove 50 miles to come and visit me. Of course, he was robed and masked and all of that, but it was a great joy to see him. And they released me for rehab, which was taking place at the Shriners Hospital there in Lexington. And this is where they then entered into the rehab session. They fitted me with some shoes with the risers in them. Remember that I wore those for a few years, and gave me some exercises to continue, and I was able to go home in time to start to school. I think I maybe was a week late getting in. I was a senior that year, and was determined to get back in school.
Dad graduated from Estill County High School in the spring of 1950 at age 17. That summer he met my mom, Joyce, and they married in the fall. By 1955, Dad is working in the Clark County Health Department in Winchester, Kentucky. Polio is still thriving.
Yeah, I was at the Clark County Health Department. I was what was called a sanitarian, and at the time, the youngest registered sanitarian in the nation. I started that position when I was 19. It was the Korean War. There was I don't remember the specifics of that, but there were just no people with any kind of qualifications that could step into something like that available. I had a first cousin who worked for State Health Department, and he told me about this and asked me if I'd be interested, and I said, well, yes, I would, but I don't know if I have the qualifications or not. And he said, well, the qualifications are that you go to Louisville, the State Health Department, and you pass a merit exam. And I said, well, what kind of exam does that involve? And he said, well, it's basically biology, some minor biology and chemistry. And I said, hey, I'll tackle it. By that time, I was married at 19. And so I did. I went to Louisville, took the merit exam, and the requirement was that you scored at least 74 or 75%. I racked up a 76%, and which was not bad with a high school education, because there was also some college degree people there. But anyhow, I enjoyed that work immensely. I was active doing inspections of food establishments and monitoring nuisance complaints involving health issues, and inspecting dairy farms, and anything anything short of medical care having to do with public health. It was in April of '55 when the Salk vaccine was approved for use after being tested, and that was Jonas Salk, who was a remarkable man. And after the vaccine had gone through about 1.5 million trials with kids across the state, across the country, it was approved for prevention. And so it became a red-hot item, so to speak, in terms of families that wanted that for their family, that wanted that for their kids. And it even got to the point, it's kind of sad to note, but people were so desperate for it, they were paying extreme prices, and even some attempts at hijacking. The stories, I don't know how valid all the stories were, but it was a difficult time for people. And anyhow, Clark County, Kentucky got an allotment of the vaccine because it was being just produced as fast as they could, but not fast enough to just be totally released. And our shipment we were notified our shipment was coming in to the Lexington airport, and the sheriff of the county was assigned to go pick it up. And he, knowing my background, asked me if I would like to go with him. And I was privileged to go and pick up the first shipment of the vaccine to Clark County.
With an armed escort?
I beg your pardon. Yeah, well, the sheriff had a gun, yes. But that was the idea, to keep it safe and get it delivered. And then it was administered through the Clark County Health